Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning. Happy Labor Day, the end of summer. And it was just recently, it seems, that we had Memorial Day, the beginning of summer, and the 4th of July. All these holidays of summer probably have been spent the same way, at home, not at the beach. And it's because of the COVID-19 isolation that we're here. And it's very sad that in these 5 months, over 188,000 Americans have died. This doesn't have to be. There are many European countries where over these months, the infection rate and death rate has really been lowered, and they're opening up their economies and schools in a safe way. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. As many of you know who Reverend Bob Oshta is, he's retired now of Sacramento. He's contacted the COVID-19 virus. He's recovering. He was in the hospital. He's out now recovering at home. But he wants to warn everyone to really be careful. So we do know people who have contacted this, and fortunately he's getting better. I do want to thank Kamar Bradford, who gave our Dharma talk last week. I thought he gave a wonderful talk. And we will be asking other members to share their experience of the Shin Dharma with us. Next week, our minister's assistant, Yukari Williams, will give a talk in Japanese after my Dharma talk in the morning. And the following week, on September 20th, for our Ohigan service, another minister's assistant, Noriko Kawai, will give our Dharma talk in both English and Japanese. Reverend Aoyama used to give a Dharma talk after our Shotsuki service every Sunday. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, and so we're hoping that Noriko and Yukari will be able to give Japanese language Dharma talks, perhaps monthly. Now, next week also, our Dharma school begins. Dr. Lisa Umekubo, with her staff and teachers, will begin an online Dharma school. They had a very successful way of presenting it in the spring, and they will start again next week. She will be ably assisted also by our minister's assistants, Reverend Laverne Imori and Reverend Smitty Smith. And so we look forward to the children taking part in the Dharma school. We are starting something else. Since we don't have online services, we're doing things more online and on our website. We're starting something called Expanded Awareness Talks, EAT. I started something like this a few years ago on site. And it is just having talks that will expand our awareness in various areas that help us. To start off, we're having Dr. Tisa Hata and her husband, Dr. Chris Uchiyama, give us an assessment of the COVID-19 situation here in San Diego. And we'll have other talks like that in the future. Arturo Rubio will be starting a Spanish language Dharma talk shortly. And we'll have other speakers in Spanish give their experience of the Shin Dharma. So we are hoping that all these activities in different languages and different subjects will help us as we're locked down in this COVID-19 situation where we are unable to meet each other in person. So you can please join us also on our Buddhism 123 on Wednesday nights. You can email Bill T to have him send you the link that will allow you to come in. Please give your name, your temple or city, and your interest in Buddhism. This is just a way that we can keep this somewhat secure so we know who will be taking part. We have about 25 people each week, and they come from various areas outside of San Diego, even different states, and a couple people from Hawaii. So please join us. Now, I asked the group what they would like to hear, and one of the suggestions was the subject of duality. This could be a little complicated, but what duality is what we call how we humans see everything. We see things in opposites. We can only have an up if there's a down. we can only see an inside if there's an outside. A good has to have a bad. There's light and dark, life and death. So everything is seen in duality, the opposites. And we're constantly trying to decide, how we negotiate life with these opposites. In Christian America, it's just almost taken for granted that we choose good over bad. But do we know which is which? We understand that God selects good and tells us what's bad. But actually, it's the priests who represent him that tell us, and these priests are human. And we know that history has shown us that sometimes they're not always right. As Buddhists, we don't seem to have this problem. As Galileo and Copernicus told us that the sun actually does not revolve around the earth, but the earth revolves around the sun. Also, there are questions about whether women are qualified to be clergy, things like that. In any event, for us Buddhists, it's not one side over the other. It's not an either-or situation. We look at both and. That, again, sounds complicated, and we'll talk more about that next week. So how do we make this decision of duality? We think that it's maybe a choice between two sides, like a teeter-totter, where it's back and forth. But in fact, it's a balance of many things. To give you an example, when I started college outside of San Jose, I went to Berkeley, and it was the first time that I lived away from home, and I had to choose a boarding house. And so there was one that was near campus, another that was a little further away. One served meals, the other didn't. One had a larger room, but it was the last room, and it had two roommates, or there are three roommates, and I would have two roommates. The other just had the usual two. And then there was a difference of cost. All these things come into every one of our decisions. It's not just the decision between two parts, but there are various things that we have to balance. I finally did choose something, and I chose the one that was closest to campus. It probably cost a little more, but my parents seemed to be okay with that. But I had no idea how to decide. I was a young person just learning, how to negotiate myself through life. So how would we, as Shin Buddhists, pick a way between this duality? Now, the Buddha, as he was enlightened, had experienced life as a prince. And he forsook that and lived a life as a ascetic, depriving himself of many of the physical things that we require. And he found that that no longer worked. And so after his enlightenment, he declared the middle path. And that middle path really affects all areas of our life. So what does that mean? Now, Shinran in the Tanin Sho says this: I do not know good and evil. If I could know good, as Amida Buddha knows, then I would know good. If I would know evil, as Amida Buddha knows evil, then I would know evil. But I am filled with blind passion. Everything is vain and deceptive. Only the Nembutsu is true and real. So let me give you an example of what Shinran is talking about. This is a story about a young monk. And in winter, as he was outside, he noticed that there were ants scurrying around looking for food. So he thought he would do something good. He went into the kitchen, got some sugar, and came out. And he put it to where the ants were, thinking he did a good job. And he was proud of himself because he had done something good. And as he was returning to the kitchen, he heard a noise, the clattering of chickens who were in the temple yard. And they had discovered that the ants were swarming to eat the sugar. And so the chickens came to eat the ants. And the monk was downfallen. His heart really fell because he realized that in his attempt to do good, he had done something that was not good for the ants. So what do we do? If we did nothing, nothing is the opposite of doing something. That's part of duality. Thousands of people did nothing. They did not vote in the 2016 election. And so they helped to elect Donald Trump. Doing nothing is also an action. So what do? I call doing nothing license apathy. And we'll explain this in the future, but doing nothing also has consequences. As Shin Buddhists, we know that we have limitations. We know that we may not be entirely right. And so we realize that it's not winning that's important, but it is how we play the game. And so in my newsletter, I talked about how we respect the other side, and that we honor our opponents because they allow us to have this interchange. And so we move forward, trying to balance things, doing our best, and yet knowing that part of what we do may not be entirely right. There's a sense of humility. Now, Congressman John Lewis has said, if you see something wrong, say something, do something. And I really agree with that. Rather than impulsively doing something, we might give it a thought. Because, as you see on TV, violent protest does not stop violent protest, and it doesn't solve anything. So we might take the recommendation of the Zen Buddhists. What they say is, don't do something, do nothing. Stop, sit. What they're saying is, what we might do is really contemplate the situation, give it some deep thought before reacting. And by doing that, we might think of what might be the best for the most people, and also what's most important. So just jumping and doing something may not be the reason, because it's the opposite of this duality. Again, we must look at this middle path of encompassing both sides. So let's consider how we as teenagers matured into adults. I remember that in my 20s, I was at school, and I started to wonder and realize that although I thought I was right as a teenager, more and more I realized that my parents were right. And I was beginning to realize that even though they weren't very sophisticated, they were Nisei, they hadn't gone to college, they weren't sophisticated, and yet they seemed to be right. Here I was very sophisticated. I had a college degree. And so I wondered about this. Mark Twain says it this way. When he was 14, he thought that his father was almost an idiot. And yet when he was about 21, he began to see that his father was very wise. And he was very amazed that in only 7 years that his father had become so smart. So that's Mark Twain, and that's how we might be thinking ourselves. But as Bombu, we might admit that we could learn more. We might consider what actions might help the most people and what might be the most beneficial outcome. And that we have to evaluate a situation from all sides. And so with humility and respect, we take action. And we can grow from our ignorance and grow to maturity. And when we make mistakes, we realize that it's a growth choice, that we can learn from that. But it's the attitude and method we choose that tells us whether we are teenagers or maturing adults. We keep in mind Shinnan's warning that we don't really know good nor evil, but also that our inaction can lead to an imbalance, and that perhaps our inaction has led to an imbalance of things. And so I think we might move forward with deep thought on this middle path. And so I'd like to discuss this further on Wednesday in our Buddhism 123 to see how our choice in this life of duality might enter into our lives. Now, we will discuss this further on a deeper level next week as we talk about how intuition might become a part of this process. So I'll end with this thought. In a world of duality, of in, out, right, wrong, up, down, myself, others, good, bad, life and death, I'm made aware of the oneness of the universe of wisdom and compassion. So out of a world of duality, we are made aware of a universe of wisdom and compassion, of oneness. Gratitude and joy are the everyday gifts of the Nembutsu. So with that, please join me in expressing our deepest sense of appreciation by reciting the Nembutsu. Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Amanda.